Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, a World Alternative Media, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and we've gone into Puerto Rico lots over the past months. Actually, we went into Puerto Rico a lot going back to 2016 when we reported on the fact that
the bankruptcy.
There were tons of people leaving. There's a mass exodus, and now that exodus is growing daily as they are plagued with food shortages. And as this article says, food shortages cripple Puerto Rico. Almost 2 months after Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico, half the island is still without power, while the other half faces constant shortages. And to go into that further, it's not that they can't deliver the food to the island. It's the fact that people have no electricity to keep things cool, and people aren't able to get frozen food.
The store can't, cool it down to keep it long enough, right?
Exactly. Well, and the whole electric system, the whole grid in Puerto Rico is very outdated. It's very government oriented. The government has basically monopolized the electric grid over the years, and that has made it incredibly inefficient. Who would have thought? Government involvement inefficient? Well, that's what they're best at, is being inefficient. At least they're efficient in being inefficient. Now, as this article from CNN of all sources says, and by the way, we are going to elaborate on this greatly because CNN is going to report some of the truth and then mislead people, and I think it's important to get the issue straight here. So as the article says, Whitefish is halting Puerto Rico power repairs, claiming it's owed $83 million.
They're claiming
yeah.
those evil capitalists.
Yeah, how dare they, not want to just do slave labor and send people out for free. You got to work for something, right? And as the article goes on to say, San Juan, Puerto Rico, Whitefish Energy is stopping its work to restore Puerto Rico's broken electricity grid because the company says it is owed more than $83 million by the island's power authority. Whitefish CEO Andy Tekmansky told CNN that repeated requests for agreed payments were not met and there was no choice but to suspend work. He claimed credit for the restoration of transmission lines by his contractors, even after his company's controversial contract with Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, PREPA, was set to be voided. Now, let's be completely clear here. Trump has nothing to do with this. A lot of people like to throw blame around, like the San Juan mayor as she stood in front of a warehouse of insane amounts of food, saying no food's getting there. Look, it has nothing to do with that. The government's always going to be inefficient. That's the way it is. But it does stem with the government and utility. And John, can you go into why exactly this is happening?
Yeah, well, the utility company here, of course, have a monopoly on the whole island. So that's one of the biggest problems here. There's no competition. Like here, we have Manitoba Hydro here in Manitoba.
Canada.
In Canada.
No one knows
where we also have a monopoly. They have, full authority on everything. Actually, one of the places, I'm from Norway, and what I like about Norway is they're very different that way because we have fully privatized the whole electrical grid.
The one thing that's privatized in Norway.
Yeah, one of the few things, and it's not just privatized for a couple of, companies to own it. It's usually the local company that owns the power grid, and then you can get power actually from any provider in Norway, like over hundreds of providers that have a dam that they could send electricity, but that you pay line rental to the local utilities company. I really like that idea because now you could choose from so many competitors that are trying to, put down the price, and the price is actually very similar to Canada, which just shows you like. Here it's way more. It should be way lower than it is in Norway, which have a very high inflation compared to Canada.
But Puerto Rico, they have this massive monopoly, and they're facing the consequences.
Oh, you totally see that, and me coming from the side of telecom, where I see, of course, the telecom industry and how that is built up with monopolies in certain places, and for sure here in Manitoba again to talk about that, all this monopolization. Is creating so much unsustainable and lack of great work that is put into retaining and having a good power grid, because it's so important, so important to have the power grid. Like everything we have today is so dependent on that power, and now you can see how terrible the poor people in Puerto Rico has been put because of this mass power outage, which is caused by a huge monopoly that they had with the state-owned utilities
Well,
company.
there'd be incentive for competition and innovation, as I always say, in a free market world as opposed to a government world. Statism only creates more statism and more dependency. And, you know, in a free market, there would be so many different competing power companies competing for the best. The people would decide with their dollar and with their business. And in a case like this, there would be other businesses stepping up to the plate to do the best they can to fix this problem instead of watching this age-old, and I really mean it, age-old electric grid fail. And people are dealing with very low amounts of food. It's starting to kind of step up a little bit, but for the most part, it's still in ruin after Hurricane Maria and, I mean, Hurricane Jose and Hurricane Irma and Harvey.
I just feel for those poor people in Puerto Rico. They've been hit with tremendous amount of natural disasters just over the last couple of months now.
Yeah.
So it's terrible. But what we got to look at is the way the power grid is set up. I come from the technology side, so I have some understanding of how the power grid works, and it's so old and deteriorating. Here in Manitoba, a lot of places I see so bad infrastructure in the power infrastructure, which is not set to. I actually want to talk about one more thing, just adding it in there. Is what if we had a solar flare hitting us, a really strong one that hit, you know, the telegraph poles, blowing up the telegraph stations back in the day. What if one of those hit? And there's actually documentaries that have been out there looking at this, and they've been looking at how can we protect the power grid, and it's not a lot of money. So if the government, goes and spends money on all this crap that they're spending money on, whatever it is, there's so much unsustainable debt that they get into. How about if you just spend a little bit of money on into the power grid? It will cost nothing but a couple of billions compared to the waste, the mass waste. But that is, of course, the government wanting to get in and using it. I think the private industry has to take over and create redo the whole grid here, because we're in dire straits in a lot of countries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking about going back to, I think, the early 1900s in San Francisco. I think there was a telegraph office that blew up after a solar flare. And look, this is something that can very easily happen. I forget the woman's name, but we were set to do an interview like a year and a half ago with a woman who actually did a documentary that I think featured G. Edward Griffin, a good friend here at WAM. I'll have to get back to that. I mean, buried in thousands of emails. But, it's a very, very real problem that we face. And when we have a grid that's like 60 years out of date, then that's what's going to happen, because the government, who's going to demand the government fix things when the government can't even, properly build a road without it breaking apart within a couple of years. I mean, it's the government. It's their job to be inefficient. Like I said, they're very efficient at being inefficient. And just to add to that, when there are small competing companies, like I said, they have to compete for the demand of the individual. That's you. And if they screw up, they're done. Instead of this monopolization and propping up through regulatory powers, tax powers by the state in order to make sure that they are the top most funded company, I should put that in quotations, wing of the government, basically. And there's no incentive anymore. There's no innovation. And it just all comes down to what the government does. And when people, a big tragedy like this happens, people are kind of trapped and they have nothing that they can really do about it, because they yell at the government all day, and the government just says, well, be prepared. We're just going to continue to get worse.
Well, what do you see? I see it here in Manitoba a lot, and I was surprised how much outages there are of power here in Manitoba compared to when I lived in Norway. There was very few. Only when there was thunderstorms I really saw in power outages. So here the infrastructure is so bad that it deteriorates. You got power outages here and there, and not a lot of people see that if they live within that community. But if you come from the outside that have seen something way better, you can actually go and see, listen, you guys have to do something. In order to be a competitive economy, you have to have a solid infrastructure to protect your technology and everything, because that's where the future is. We are gonna, evolve greatly if we let the government get far out of the way and let the private sector come in and hardcore compete, because that's what I saw in Norway on the telecom side. People came in, the fiber optical companies just came in. There was 20, 30 different fiber optical companies just in like under 2.2 million people in Norway that came in and fought against each other and built infrastructure. Some cooperated a little bit, some built new infrastructure, and things got done.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not when you sit on your back letting these governments run things, sitting there and not willing to spend money on the most important things that we need for a modern day society to go around, which is the infrastructure. It's road, it's everything.
Well, they spend a lot of money on it, but for all the wrong reasons. They spend way more money than they need to.
Yeah, we could go all into roads. We should stop there. Because,
that's the thing. I think we've made our point. Puerto Rico has a debt crisis. There's already a ton of people leaving the island before all of this happened, and it's just getting much worse. And there's this talk about making them of the 51st state and blah, blah, blah. Government isn't going to solve any of these things. Look, the bottom line, in my opinion, is government bad, free market good, and always be over-prepared, because when this kind of stuff happens, it all comes down to you. The government can't save you from your problems. You have to be able to actually be prepared enough to be independent enough, to be self-sustainable enough, to be prepared for something like this happening, which is kind of inevitable in a place like Puerto Rico.
Yeah, no, we should talk quickly about this before we end the video. Self-sustainability with energy, going with either wind power or solar power that you can have locally at your location. I've seen fantastic solar generators that are actually, they call it EMP proof, but it's solar storm proof. So if it gets hit, it doesn't damage the circuitry and everything in the generator. Things like that. If you have, for example, if you have a little creek nearby, you could build a little turbine that could generate some power for you.
If the government allows you to.
Well, of course not. But there's a lot of wide array of things that you could do.
Collect rainwater, again, if the government lets you.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the government is in there destroying our lives when they should just be far out of the way.
They make things as difficult for us as possible under the guise of helping us, and it's insane.
Wouldn't it be great to have energy independence? Think about how great people would live their lives if they had that energy independence. They weren't dependent on a massive corporation, like, for example, with Manitoba Hydro, owning everything and then just hiking the price as they want to whenever they're just going to blame whatever they can to keep the price going up to pay their highly overpriced employees.
But instead we have the religion of statism.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to fight really hard to get our own properties back and our own power back. We could have
literally power to the people.
Yeah, power to the people.
Individuals.
Exactly. No, but the individual has to take care of themselves, and you see that with the power outages here. If people were energy independent in Puerto Rico, you wouldn't have the food shortage problem, or you wouldn't have all the other things that are happening down there because of the electrical outages.
Absolutely. So, closing that off, just always look towards, as we always say, food, water, shelter, defense. You're not gathering things for the toughest guy in the block. Gold, silver, Bitcoin, decentralized.
Gold, silver was actually huge. I heard some reports that the internet and everything is down there, but gold and silver is still working.
That centrally planned cashless society isn't working too well either for them when the Federal Reserve is flying over huge amounts of money to Puerto Rico, and I think we've reported on this already. So anyway, to close it off for today, thanks for watching, everyone, and until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change. Like what you see here at WAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so overwhelmingly demonetized and censored by YouTube as the Anti-Defamation League comes in and flags all of our content as hate speech. You can also find me at Josh Sigurdson at steemit.com. That's steemit.com, the future of social media, where you get paid in the upvote of your post via Steem, the cryptocurrency. You can also find our Bitcoin address in the description and the comments below, as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And don't forget to come on down to Anarchapulco in Acapulco, Mexico in February, one of the best events of the year, and you can save money on your tickets by typing in promo code WAM. That's WAM. We'll leave the link below for you, and until next time, don't forget to subscribe. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
Bye.